We always liked going to Nathan's house. It was out in the country, and to us, that's where all the excitement could be found. We were all bored in town. Bored because school was out for the summer. Bored of our neighborhoods, bored of the TV, bored of our families. So to us, the country was the new territory, outside in the wilderness where we could explore different ground.
It was in the summer of 1993. The kids had just finished ninth grade, and they had been out of school for about a month and a half. They had gotten together at one of their friends' places outside of town in the area known as Maple Woods, about a mile away from Crystal Lake. Apparently, they were hanging out in the woods all day at this small cabin about a quarter of a mile away from their friend's house.
Usually, when we went to Nathan's house, we would go and check out the woods behind his property. There was a creek out there, and we would fish crawdad out of, and a big tree where we could swing from. But the best thing out there was a shed that Nathan's dad had built to store his hunting gear in. 2 or 3 summers before, Nathan's father had cleared out the storage cabin because he gave up hunting. I guess he was never really good at any of it.
We found evidence of substance abuse in the cabin. The place had belonged to one of the boys' fathers, and supposedly he had no use for it anymore and never went there. When we questioned the father, he claimed not to have known that the kids ever went there to hang out. There was another little cabin out there as well, about a half a mile away from the first one. When we went out to the woods for the investigation, it appears as if the kids had gone and hung out at the other place as well. We believe it happened in between the two different cabins.
One day, Nathan, Rachel, Nora, and I were hanging out in Nathan's dad's shed. Rachel and Nora were sisters, and they lived in town near my neighborhood. We all went to school together, but we never really hung out until that summer. Nathan and Rachel had hooked up at the end of the school year, and they would go to the shed and get high and make out. Sometimes they would let Nora and me hang out in the shed too. We would smoke and listen to music and stuff. But that day we were all getting pretty bored. You could say that we had cabin fever, and so we decided to go out in the woods and mess around. And then Nathan had this idea of going to check out another shed that he had found a couple of days before. He said that it was about only a half a mile away, and we were so restless that we decided to take a little walk in the woods.
As far as we could tell, no one owned the second cabin. Our research shows that nobody in the area had ever used it. Apparently it had been there for some time, but kept up in a decent manner. Nothing was inside of it when we got there, except of course a few traces of the kids, such as their cigarette butts and their shoe prints and fingerprints.
On the way to the other shed, Nathan explained to us what he had found there a few days before. He said that he discovered a porno magazine called Tits and Clits. It was supposed to be from the 70s, and we all thought it would be funny to see some explicit vintage porn. As we got closer to the other shed, Nora began complaining that she didn't feel too good. Her sister Rachel just said it was the pot that we'd been smoking. I have to admit, I didn't feel too hot either at the time. But I don't think it was the weed that was making us feel bad. We got to the other shed just as the sun was going down.
It had rained that night, one of those typical Midwestern summer storms. We think the kids stayed inside of the shed while the storm hit, then left when it had passed. When we went to investigate the area the next day, the ground was of course very muddy. We thought that this would help our search, and it did to some extent. After about 3 or 4 hours of combing the area, we found some tracks in the mud. The funny thing is, the trail had only one pair of shoe prints, not four, and they didn't belong to any of the kids. To this day, we still don't know whom they belong to.
As we were flipping through the pages of the porno magazine, it started to rain really hard. Honestly, we didn't see it coming. It was one of those storms that just creeps up on you really fast. The only thing we could do was wait in the shed until the rain stopped. But it got darker and darker, and all we wanted to do was head back to Nathan's dad's shed. Nora was freaking out a little because she thought that she was hearing some weird noises coming from the roof, like someone was walking on top of it. Again, we thought it was the pot. but then we all got a little scared. So when the storm let up a little, we left. Once we got outside, we couldn't see anything at all, but we decided to keep going. No one said a word to each other on the way back. I think we were about halfway to the other shed when it happened.
We ended up having 3 teams for the investigation. One group inspected the first cabin, the second unit examined the other shed, and the third team checked out the area between the 2 places. We found the pornographic magazine almost exactly in the middle of the 2 cabins, about 50 feet north of where we found the unidentifiable shoe prints.